All right. Perfect. Okay, well, I will first give the mic over to Talia before I introduce our presenter for today.
Thank you. So it's Good News Thursday, and I have just two good pieces of good news. First is that the Como roller derby team is finally back.
We're back.
This Saturday, they are hosting Cape Girardeau for their first true games since March of 2019. And if you would like more details, you can check out their social media, their website, or you can talk to Professor Bean, who is a roller derbier herself.
Indeed.
And then secondly is Larissa Ferreira dos Santos from Dr. Padilla's lab took first place in the postdoc poster competition at Cardiovascular Day. So congrats to her.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Talia. And it is my pleasure today to get to introduce our presenter, Dr. Jessie Hoffman. Is PhD RD, is an assistant professor in the Department of Human Nutrition at Winthrop University. She holds a master's in nutrition from UNC Greensboro and a PhD in nutrition sciences from the University of Kentucky. After completing her PhD, she completed her dietetic internship through Iowa State University. Her dietetic and research expertise are in gastrointestinal conditions and the gut microbiome. Currently, her research focuses on the impact of diet and lifestyle factors on gastrointestinal health and the gut microbiome. Additionally, although it says Jessie, I just can't do that, Dr. Hoffman is passionate about scientific and nutrition science communication and does so regularly through social media. In fact, some of our students here follow her on various social media platforms, and I reference her blog regarding navigating nutrition science and research. So from breaking down nutrition science to busting myths that are so prevalent in today's society, she strives to empower individuals to become responsible consumers of social media content and experts on their own bodies. If you could, let's take a moment to welcome her in whatever fashion you like to do in this particular medium. And without further ado, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. So I have learned through Zoom meetings that if I export my slides to PDF and present them in preview, it works way better than PowerPoint. So I'm going to share my screen and then go to that full screen. And then y'all are going to have to tell me once I hit full screen if you can see it.
Yes, looks great.
Is it full screen now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, sweet. So thank you everyone for inviting me today to speak with you. I'm really excited to kind of talk a little bit about my experience. So the way I've shaped this talk is I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of basically how I got to where I am. Especially with like my education path, but then how I kind of fell into science communication online, because like the title kind of suggests, I didn't intend to enter that field. I kind of just fell into it and then started learning as I went. And I'll share some tips and different things like that about why I think science communication is important, especially in nutrition and other health and exercise fields. And then I'll give you kind of some tips on how you might want to get started if you want to get started, but I will encourage you to get started. All right, now what? Okay, so before I kind of go into my back, I'm going to use this term SciComm a lot throughout the entire talk. So before I jump into the background and kind of give you an overview of like what my path looked like, because I use this term so heavily throughout my presentation, it's important to kind of define it on the outset. So when I say science communication or SciComm, it's really defined as the practice of informing and educating and raising awareness of science-related topics. And so nutrition, exercise, any sort of health or medical field, definitely science-related topics. And so this is different than what we would consider scientific communication. Typically, we consider scientific communication being like peer-to-peer in the science field or communicating with other scientists or other professionals, whereas SciComm or science communication is really focused on communicating some of that information to a public audience. So how do we take all of the heavy concepts that we're learning about in classes and through research, and how do we disseminate that to the public? So that's kind of a background of this term that I'll use throughout this talk. But I'm going to start, like I said, with my path and kind of give you an idea of my very roundabout, not so linear path through my education. I started out with a bachelor's in biology, thought I wanted to be pre-vet. Got like a semester or two in, learned I really like animals a little too much to be a vet, and that I couldn't kind of separate those things. I always had an interest in education. My mom's an educator, my grandmother's an educator, always kind of had that within me. And so I switched to biology education. Also helped that a ton of my friends in college were education majors. And so I switched momentarily to biology education, focused on middle school and high school teaching, did a rotation in a middle school and high school, and quickly decided that was not for me. And then so I just kind of switched my path there to just go bio just for grad school. Went and got my master's at UNC Greensboro, learned for the first time what a dietitian was, started doing research, jumped into my PhD to continue to do that, also continued on the RD courses. That's really when I got into gut health and the gut microbiome. And that's really when I started doing some SciComm stuff on social media. And I'll break down each of these a little bit into different sections and give you an idea of kind of where my mindset was at the time, and things that I found helpful. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then I jumped into my dietetic internship and a postdoc at the same time. Don't recommend that. That's a lot at once. I had really understanding mentors that would allow me to do my internship, like kind of 9 to 5, and then postdoc on the weekends and like late at nights, and then some virtually too. And I'll talk a little about that as well. My postdoc was quite different than what a lot of people see as a postdoc, and it's called a teaching focused postdoc, but it's actually becoming more common, and especially as we enter like online education spaces. And now I'm a registered dietitian and professor. My expertise as a RD and as a researcher are in GI conditions and gut health, but I'm currently at a primary teaching institution where I teach a 4-4. So 4 classes fall, 4 classes spring. Sometimes I get a reduction for my teaching or for my research efforts. But my main focus is on teaching. And I'll talk a little bit later about how I bring some of the SciComm aspects into my teaching. So, like I said, I was going to break down a little bit, and I got a little ahead of myself talking about undergrad. I was spilling everything that I was going to talk about on that kind of overview graphic slide. But I'm going to break each section of my career down into kind of my evolution as a scientist and an educator. And so in undergrad, like I said before, I had always been interested in education, quickly learned I wasn't really made out for doing K through 12 education, not really for me. I really wanted to work with individuals that were, if I was going to teach, work with individuals that were really interested in being in my classroom kind of thing. And there was a lot of stuff that was about that involved the K through 12 education that wasn't super for me. I didn't even read my first journal article until my sophomore year, which now as a professor, I find that like honestly kind of scary, because we make our freshmen read journal articles, and a lot of them have already had experience in high school. So I felt like very behind, especially as I look back now. I was like, that's not so great. And then my research interest wasn't really sparked until my junior year in biochem lab. And that's only because I had a professor that was really interested in conducting her own research and working with yeast and different basic lab techniques. I should also preface all of this with I went to a very small university, private university. It had maybe 1,500 students in the entire university. And so it was not research focused. So no one was doing research. So I didn't even get my first experience with research until I was working in the biochem lab with her. And I quickly learned I really like this stuff, but I also know I have a really good passion for nutrition. And I had always had an interest in nutrition, and then learned that I could go get a master's and kind of marry those two and learn more and expand 2 different skill sets at one. I also have highlighted here my science communication skills at this time were nil. I think I did maybe 1 poster presentation like my senior year, but it was on some education training that I had done. It was not research focused at all. And then the social media landscape, it was purely just social in nature. This was like 2010, 2013 time span where we were just using Facebook, and Instagram was truly just you snap a picture and you post it, maybe like 2-word caption, and that was it. So as I moved into my master's in nutrition, the big hallmarks of this time where I started conducting my first research studies, like legit research studies, designed them partially myself with the guidance of my mentor, and implemented them. The big thing here that kind of I can attribute it to sparking my interest in SciComm was I saw a misstep with science communication of my research. There was a university press brief that kind of picked up one of the studies that we had just completed and published. And we've only worked with mice in the lab that I was working with, and we were working with grape powder in mice and looking at metabolic outcomes, and then tacked on the microbiome to that as well. And I remember reading this press brief that came out, and they used the word participants and they didn't use the word mice. And it was just very misleading. And that kind of, I feel like, was probably my sparking point for like, hey, there's definitely a disconnect in the research aspect and how we can communicate this to the public. And if we're not doing it directly, someone's communicating that for us, and it's getting kind of misconstrued as it goes down the line. My master's was also when I started TAing for different classes and really enjoyed the aspect of mentoring students and tutoring and different things like that. I got to give my first lectures. And so that was really my first experience with teaching in a college setting, and it ignited my love for teaching in that setting again. But I also learned during my master's to add more complexities. I learned, well, I really also want to be able to work one-on-one with individuals with nutrition. And I had never really heard of a dietitian before that. And my master's was kind of my first experience with like really hearing about like what a dietitian was, what they did, and then kind of scope of practice of like, oh, they're the ones that really are the only people that really should be working one-on-one with people with nutritional concerns, especially in the medical related field. So I started doing some of my RD DPD coursework, but also knew I really desired more experience with research. So I completed a chunk of my DPD undergrad coursework alongside of my master's, put that on hold as I transitioned into my PhD with just the hopes that my next stage would let me finish completing that, or I'd figure out a way to finish it. My science communication skills at this time were still very little. I think a lot of programs that are really just research focused don't provide a ton of opportunities to practice scientific communication or science communication to the public. You get a lot of opportunities to kind of present your science to different individuals. I went and presented this at experimental biology when the American Society of Nutrition was a part of that big conference, but I didn't actually ever really get the chance to kind of communicate some of the things I was learning to the public. The social media landscape at this time was the start of influencer culture. So it was your first bodybuilder, nutrition influencers giving kind of fitness tips online, which is where this kind of started, like the 2013 to 2015 kind of timeframe. But like I said, I knew I wasn't done with research. I knew I wanted more. And so I just continued where my heart was leading me. I still really didn't have a good plan of what I wanted to do with my career. I just knew I wasn't done learning and kind of kicking the can down the road, trying to prolong like doing the adult thing, truthfully. And so hallmarks of my time when I was getting my PhD in nutritional sciences, the big thing here that I think shaped largely my experience and kind of pushing me into SciComm was I was continuing with my DPD courses, and I was also doing my research as well. But the issue that I encountered was there was a dietetics department that was in the College of Agriculture and that I was taking my DPD classes in. And there was the nutritional science department, which was in the College of Medicine, which is where I was doing my PhD in. And it frustrated me a lot that the two did not communicate. So you had the nutritional scientists that were the hardcore, like doing all the bench research, tons of cardiovascular, lots of that kind of stuff, research mechanistic cell culture, animal models. And then you had the dietetics department who were doing research, but more community focused, public focused, things like that. But the two really didn't communicate with each other. And I was bridging between the two. And so that kind of spurred a little bit of my interest in kind of SciComm, because I saw that the nutrition scientists weren't really good at communicating the actual science that they were actually researching on. So I worked as in the dietetics department, dietetics expects you to volunteer a good bit and get kind of out in the community. And so I did volunteer a lot in the community. I worked a lot with kids. I wrote a few grants that received funding for different adolescent nutrition programs in the community. So I was heavily engaged in the community, really starting to like practice some of these science communication skills just by being thrown into it and having to figure it out. No one gave me kind of a template or a tool book. I was thrown kind of into working with adolescents and then young adults, and was basically like, you need to teach them all about nutrition and everything they need to know without having like a lot of experience in that. Like I said, I also got really frustrated at this time with the lack of community involvement in science. This was really within my department or just my field of nutritional science. I felt we were doing a lot of really good research, but because we were doing mouse and cell culture based research, I felt like a lot of like even individual like students, PIs, everyone just felt like it was so removed from human-based work that there was no purpose in communicating it to the public. And so there was really no effort made to even communicate like, hey, we're doing this type of research and this is why we're doing it. And so that kind of frustrated me because I kind of sit there and think we get these massive grants from these governmentally funded institutions that are receiving taxpayer dollars, which are the public who are then stakeholders in our research. And if we're not communicating it to them, we're really doing them a disservice, and we're setting ourselves up in the science field for failure later because we really need that public support. And I'll talk more about that and when I try to convince you that why SciComm is important. So I started my social media account. I just took my personal Instagram, which I don't really recommend if you're starting out in SciComm. I just changed my personal Instagram and started posting kind of more sciencey professional stuff. Really started as just an effort to start communicating with like my friends and family that followed me, to show them what I was doing in the lab. I thought I was doing a bunch of cool things, wanted to share about everything I was doing and why I thought it was cool and what the science was behind it. And so that's really just how I started. I was also interning with an RD at the time, and she was very into kind of myth busting and different things like that online. And she kind of got me into that aspect of sharing some of nutritional information as well. So I would classify my science communication skills at this time as still developing. I will never consider myself like an expert in SciComm, but the social media landscape, this was a time when you started to see SciComm influencers, or just SciComm individuals showing up online, starting to share scientific information. And this only continued to expand, especially as we got into 2020 when COVID hit. And I feel like a lot of people came and scientists came to try to kind of like quelch fears that were within the community and kind of combat a lot of misinformation. So after my PhD, I transitioned into a teaching-focused postdoc, which is not super common, but they do exist out there and they are becoming more common. A teaching-focused postdoc is basically, instead of doing research only for your postdoc and developing your career set that way, you are engaged in some sort of teaching experience. And so in my case, mine came about because I had indicated an interest in teaching to another mentor within my department who was responsible for some of the educational curriculum. And they knew they were starting to launch a certificate in nutritional sciences for medical professionals. And they were also getting ready to try to start launching an online master's program, and that they needed help to do that. And they needed someone that had tech skills, which I don't consider myself like a coder or anything, but I am a millennial. I have a decent amount of tech skills compared to some people. And so it really came about through networking and the fact that she knew at the time during my PhD, there were not opportunities really for me to teach within the department because we were a master's and PhD only department. We didn't have an undergrad. And so there were really no opportunities for me to really practice teaching and expand my teaching skills within the department. And she knew I still wanted those. And so it was a great opportunity. I jumped on it. But really it was largely in curriculum development, course design, and online course implementation and management. And so I really credit that with the job I currently have, and also credit getting that job with the fact that I was doing some SciComm online and had evidence that I was able to kind of utilize technology and be able to kind of communicate messages effectively online. Like I said, at this time, I also completed my dietetic internship. As I became more confident in kind of my dietetics and nutrition education. I started sharing more nutrition content on social media, not just science, like lab science stuff. And then my SciComm reach increased pretty dramatically during this time. And that's when I started building a network of different professionals doing SciComm on social media. And so I have lots of friends that I've met virtually through social media, people I've collaborated with, just through the fact that we all are kind of in the same network of different professionals in different areas of science that have decided to enter the online space and try to communicate and educate. I also started getting regularly invited on podcasts, which is another great way to do science communication. Lots of people listen to podcasts. But overall, my science communication skills at this time I would consider intermediate, and the social media presence was, there was a much larger SciComm presence, but this is when TikTok started to explode. So we were starting to see things shift from a lot of the stuff that I had done before was very graphic focused content, and now everything was starting to shift to video, which I will fully admit now I have not mastered the art of video because I do not like showing up. I am quite an introvert by nature, and video is just not my thing. So still navigating that aspect, but I'll give you some tips on how to kind of do that later. And then currently as a dietitian and professor, how I've continued to evolve as a scientist and educator is teaching skills definitely drastically improved as I was thrown into you need to teach. But like I can say, my teaching focused postdoc and my just online SciComm skills really are the reason that I have the current position that I have, because I was brought on to help launch an online master's program, which we have now launched. So I teach half pretty much in our online master's program, and I teach half in our undergrad in-person dietetics program, which I love. I get student interaction face-to-face. I get to work on those online skills and work with students all across the nation. I still conduct research. It's a small part of my expectations for my job. But this is the first time solely working with humans. So I've been navigating that aspect in terms of recruitment and things like that. But my research, again, here is really focused and student education and development. It's not really focused on how many publications you can get. It's really, are students learning the research process? Are you getting engaged with students? Are you sending them out into the community to present posters, different conferences and things like that? One other big thing that I started doing is integrating SciComm into my classes. So I will share this a little bit later, but SciComm is a part of every single class that I do. And so because I think it's an important aspect, especially in our field. And then I continued my SciComm reach online. My Instagram account continued to grow. I published papers and wrote books with people I met over Instagram and still regularly doing podcasts. So my SciComm focus, because of my expertise, is general gut health info, because I have clinical and research experience in that area, microbiome, because my master's and PhD were in that area, and then general nutrition info, mainly because I saw a large gap in public nutrition knowledge, and just general nutrition myth busting, because there's a ton of bad information online that you have to kind of combat and wade through. All right, so now I'm going to convince you why it's important to do SciComm as a nutrition health professional in any sort of science field. So this is a model that I found online that talks about how science communication has really evolved over time. We've grown greatly in the methods in which we've engaged the public with our science. So we used to operate a long time ago back in something called the deficit model. So basically scientists were just telling the public, this is what you should believe, basically, and this is what the science is, rather than taking the time to explain it to them. So that explanation part is within the dialogue model. So scientists now move to kind of trying to explain and educate. So it's really just coming from a part of, I'm telling you, explaining a little bit in more detail what the science means and things like that. But there's still a lack of community involvement and the public involvement in that science. And so now they've kind of moved towards more of a participation model of scientific communication. And this is where the public is engaged with you in the conversation regarding science. So you're communicating with the public's communicating with you, which really is one of the best ways in which we can utilize science communication and further research. Because like I said, the public is not only probably your research test subjects, but for a lot of individuals, they're the individuals that are technically funding a lot of the research that we're doing. So they are the stakeholders in the research. They are at the root of all of the health fields. We are doing research to benefit the public. And if we're not taking the time to explain it to them, we're doing them a disservice. So that conversing between scientists and the public is really important. And that's really scientific communication. Oh, now it's frozen. Come on. Okay. And again, this is just a little bit more detail on this PEST, public engagement in science and technology, and just how if we embed public engagement within research culture, one big proponent or component that comes out of that is that we increase trust in science and increase the idea of the public's importance and how much they kind of value the scientific process and research, which not only ensures that we have adequate funding moving forward to continue to do research, but encourages others, younger individuals, to enter the field as they get older. And so I believe that we kind of have like a responsibility as at any level of research you're doing, at any level of science that you are involved in, that you should be actively engaging in scientific communication. And so the primary goals of SciComm, this goes kind of in order. The first thing that we have to do with science communication, one of the main goals is just to increase trust. And remove the scientists are only white in white lab coats, crazy people, crazy hair, not doing any sort of, just doing crazy like lab-based research. There's that perception that has just been it's like cartoons and everything. I don't think it's quite as bad as it used to be, but the main goal is really to increase trust and break down all those barriers that make science seem crazy and scary and just not tangible for a lot of individuals in the public. The next step of that would be increase understanding. So you're providing some of that education on the importance of research in science. But alongside of that, you're not just engaging in that telling them, you're also engaging them. So you're increasing engagement. You're emphasizing that they do play a key role in this process of research. You're showing them that they are valued in this process. They're not just test subjects. They're not just someone that's helping you fund it. They are truly valued in this research process, and they are a part of it. They have say in some of those things, and that leads to increased support. So support is really important. It's going to drive that public participation, the funding of research, and then the future STEM workforce. And this was basically just elaborates kind of for your own reference. AAAS has this logic model for public engagement of science that basically just talks about kind of the inputs, activities, and the outcomes of different, of basically engaging in science communication with the public. Again, the main big effect is to kind of like what I outlined on the last slide, like build trust, engage the community, ensure a workforce of STEM individuals kind of entering that later on, and just encourage that dialogue between the public and the scientists themselves. So this is really for your reference, just a larger explanation of what I kind of went over on the last slide. So different modes of SciComm that you can do. Lots of different ones. You can do personal and direct science communication, which would just be sitting down one-on-one or in a small group of people and kind of talking to them, conversing with them back and forth, not just one way where you're telling them about it, but you're also hearing them kind of reflect what you're saying and then concerns and questions and things like that. Definitely things like events and presentations, whether that's like kind of going out in the community and presenting about different topics. There's a lot of ways to get involved in our fields with different extension agencies that are putting on kind of community engaged like groups where you can go present on. I've presented on things like gut health for older women and different things like that and getting them involved. And there's definitely these things like print materials and through journalism that have always kind of been aspects of science communication. But where we're seeing like newer areas of science communication really expand are in the online space. So through things like websites and blogs, videos and podcasts, so thinking YouTube, and then just podcasts, and then social media is a really big one. So I'm really going to focus kind of on the social media aspect because that's where I entered. I have a little bit of expertise in website and blogs, but social media is really where I leaned into kind of the SciComm aspect. And so to kind of provide you with a little bit of evidence of why I think you should be doing science communication online and more specifically on social media, there was a research study, and this was in 2014. So I can only assume that it's much greater now. But at that time, 8 in 10 internet users searched for health info online. And of those, 74% indicated that they use social media to search for health info. So if we're not showing up in these spaces, someone is, and they're communicating some info about health. And if it's not the individuals that have expertise in certain areas, they could be getting miscommunicated. This is just adding a little bit more. This was not like a published research study, but it was a survey of 1,000 patients in an online patient community, just kind of surveying where did they look for health information. You can see it's a variety of different things, but search engines, social media. Social media came up as like 11%. A lot of people are probably even getting to social media through things just like general search engines. And then you have your traditional like, am I dying websites like WebMD. What resources do you evaluate new treatment options? 9% said social media. They're going to social media to evaluate different treatment options, probably to try to find different stories of individuals that have gone through the same thing, to try to find that bit of community there. But there's a lot of risks that can come with that when you're finding some of the info online. And then where do you look for reliable information about medication side effects? Again, 7% said social media. And so there's still, even though it's, it seems low in percentage, that's still somebody is going to social media to try to find information about health, medication side effects, whether they should undergo chemotherapy treatment, different things like that. And so again, if we're not showing up in these spaces, someone is showing up and speaking for us. And this is basically kind of what I said here. And the problem in nutrition and health fields is it's often individuals with the least health experience, or least experience, sorry, not health experience, but maybe like that too. Least experience and credentials that often have the loudest voices. And you see individuals with that blue check mark, sometimes they're reliable. Sometimes they're doctors or somebody that actually has credentials. But you can get a blue check mark just because you have a lot of followers. It doesn't automatically mean that you're credible. And that kind of has a halo effect in individuals' minds where they see that blue check mark. They're like, automatically, this person is a credible, reliable source. I'm going to follow what they have to say. And so this leads me to a concept that I think I came up with. I mean, maybe I'm sure someone else has said it, but this arose from when I was trying to explain what the phenomenon that happened to me when individuals kind of took my research and misconstrued it when they were communicating to the public. But I call it research telephone. And so if we're not directly communicating to the public, it goes through this kind of line of research telephone. So the primary researchers may say things like artificial sweetener consumption in mice at really high doses induce alterations in microbial diversity and change 5 different microbial taxa. And then the university prep brief tries to dumb it down a little bit and make it a little more digestible, but they make the mistake of, and I used my own personal experience here, of just saying like, well, it said alterations here, but now they say negatively alter, and now they use the word participants instead of in mice. And so now you're one further removed, your information is a little skewed already. Well, a general news outlet then picks it up, and then you go from negatively alter to damage your microbiome, and they always have kind of a catchy title, is your Diet Coke habit trying to kill you, kind of things like that. And then you have the social media health guru. Now currently it's guys on TikTok that are walking shirtless through grocery stores, shaming people for what they're putting in their cart, if anyone's seen that kind of stuff on social media, and like pushing out really bad information. But basically they're saying like artificial sweeteners are toxic and destroy your gut. So we've gone from a research study in mice with very specific findings that don't even say it negatively affected to they're toxic and destroy your gut. And so then you have to deal with the fact that your grandma's calling you and saying, well, I read online that. And I use an example of kind of a grandma because they're, in my opinion, some of the vulnerable populations online, the older individuals that kind of get online and just kind of take things as fact, because maybe they're not as engaged in some of the online like social landscape. And I speak from personal experience. My grandmother calls me all the time, well, I heard this new diet, things like that. So again, if we're not directly communicating to the public, it's going through that research telephone, some things get miscommunicated. And there are really risks of that, especially in the nutrition science field. In our field specifically, individuals could change dietary intake without evidence, which could cause, I mean, if you're going from just eating a regular diet to now you hear carnivore, the carnivore diet is like the new hot thing and it's great for you, and you already have concerns about high cholesterol, that's not going to be the best thing for you. Or for anybody. I don't like that diet. That's one of the dumbest ones, but that's my own personal bias. Then potential drug nutrient interactions, if you're changing your diet without evidence, especially in kind of those older populations that might be taking tons of different medications just to manage health conditions. Engaging tons of unsupported, we see this word in the gut space, protocols that may impact existing health conditions or increase risk of health issues. In my gut space specifically, I see people undergoing like these detox protocols where they're taking a ton of laxatives and things like that, which not only put stress on your GI symptom, but can actually lead to things like perforations in your intestine and different things like that. One big thing is they're bypassing oversight from medical providers. They're trusting someone on Instagram saying, well, I heard this and I heard so-and-so did this, and so I'm going to do it. They're kind of just jumping to kind of manage their own health without actually seeking the oversight of someone qualified who can say, hey, changing this dietary habit or taking this supplement is going to interfere with your current health condition, and it could be very risky. And then those that are typically most at risk for receiving inaccurate info are commonly some of the more vulnerable populations. And so that's something we really have to take into consideration, especially in the nutrition and health space. And one example of scientific research telephone that just came out was this. There was a study that looked at didn't look at dietary erythritol, looked at erythritol intake, or not even intake, looked at erythritol in your blood and correlated it to heart attack and stroke. And CNN picked it up and tons of other news outlets picked it up. If you haven't heard about it, it's all over social media now. There's tons of SciComm people debunking it and stuff like that. But basically, CNN picked it up and said it's linked to heart attack and stroke, which is not really what the study said and not really what they did. One big thing, so erythritol is that it's like a sugar alcohol that's found in, it's one of the most commonly used ones now in a lot of keto products and different health foods that are looking to have lower sugar. But basically, in this study, they didn't track dietary erythritol. They just measured serum erythritol. Their correlations relied on mainly unhealthy participants. A lot of these participants had metabolic abnormalities, already had issues with the cardiovascular system, different things like that. And the important thing here is that we produce erythritol endogenously, and typically can be to a greater extent if you have metabolic complications already. So it is endogenously produced in our body, meaning our body makes it ourselves. And the important thing here is they just looked at the amount technically that was in your blood. They had no evidence of saying like, well, this was produced endogenously or this was from your diet. And all they did was correlate the level in your blood to your risk of heart attack and stroke. And then they did basically kind of a proof of concept by giving 8 healthy individuals, which was not even the population they were studying, a drink that contained like 30 grams or so of erythritol, and basically proved that it increased their blood levels of erythritol, which makes sense. But there's just like a misstep between correlation and causation, which we see a lot in the nutrition space. And the study didn't even make those conclusions that it's this heavily linked to heart attack and stroke, but news outlets pick it up because it's going to make things fly off the shelves, and they're gonna get more clicks. So some brief tips for SciComm, designing and implementing different effective methods. The big thing with communicating in science online is focusing on how you're going to communicate it to individuals. So you're going to identify your audience. But some big tips for kind of how you want to communicate is you want to tell a story. Humans are programmed to respond to stories. It helps build trust. And like I said, building that trust is a really important aspect of SciComm. You have to be able to kind of build that trust and break that barrier down, no matter what field you're in. Avoiding jargon, which can be really hard if you are a really hardcore researcher in the lab studying different biochemical pathways and things like that. But the important thing is to keep it simple. You're not dumbing it down, you're just simplifying it. It's not like good practice to basically try to dumb something down for someone, but you're just explaining it in a way that they can kind of better relate to. And one way you can do that is to use things like analogies. It makes abstract concepts more familiar, they're less daunting. You can also use things like images and props. So this is where SciComm Online and Instagram and things like that are really helpful, because pictures are worth 1,000 words. It's easier to digest in online formats. That's why we're seeing TikTok boom, is because everyone can digest videos very much much more quickly than they can read an entire paragraph or paper. Another thing that I kind of already mentioned was, again, you're thinking about your tone. You're communicating it in a way that they can understand it without giving off that you're dumbing it down. You're also not assuming that your audience has adequate background information in order to understand what you're talking about. So you're going to make sure that you provide the adequate background information to get anyone up to speed who you're communicating to. And then you're also going to want to ask questions. So it brings the audience further into the conversation. Again, that's the public engagement in science and technology bit, that you're conversing with them. It's not a one-way street where you're just telling them, but you're asking them, hey, what do you think about this? What is your experience with this? You're not just telling them. So how do you get started in SciComm? First thing would be to start following people on SciComm and basically observing how they kind of engage with the community in terms of science and research. There are tons of different ways to do it. I am not the best at it, and I will admit I'm not the best at it. I'm also not the most consistent at it online. But there's tons of people out there that are doing it, and they all have different ways in which they engage the audience. So basically, just follow people, figure out what you like, take bits and pieces from people. What do you like? What do you not like? How do you perceive as what's most effective? Another next thing would be identify your niche and central message. You can't be an expert in everything, and it's often that you're probably not going to be able to communicate about everything. So what is something that you're really passionate about, that you feel like you have a strong expertise in, that you feel like you want to communicate about? For me, that was basically like GI health, gut microbiome. That was my area and niche. Other thing you can think about is if you're doing kind of graphic stuff online, like Instagram, you might want to think about branding. The way our Instagram page looks, if it's more cohesive, if it's kind of branded, that's more appealing. People are going to be more kind of enticed to kind of come in and read more if your page looks kind of just like aesthetic and branded. There are trainings that you can search for. There's a lot of universities that are putting out free resources. There's online trainings. I know even a SciComm influencer online that is now put together like a SciComm course that she basically teaches online as well for individuals in like health professions that want to learn how to do SciComm. And then just start creating content. Figure out what type of content do you want to create, video, graphic, do you want to just do websites and blogs, different things like that. But then just start creating it. Canva is like a dream if you love graphics, and I'll show you what that looks like kind of on the next slide. But then you also need to keep tabs on trends. So different trending sounds and videos and things like that, because that's really how TikTok, that's how you're gonna get your engagement. Again, building trust has been kind of a theme that I've kind of blend throughout this entire talk. Is you have to build trust. That means on things like Instagram and TikTok, showing up authentically, showing that you're a real human, showing bits and pieces into your daily life. I showed last week on my Instagram that I spilled coffee all over myself, which was, I mean, that's just a piece of my daily life. So demonstrate that you're real, not just this like computer behind, just kind of behind a screen. And then network with other individuals and professionals. If you're creating that network of other professionals that are SciComm or in those health related fields, they're more likely to kind of share your content, and then that's how your reach expands. And then keep up with changing trends and continue to refine your message. So we saw things transition from Instagram kind of moved more from graphic study posts into more video focused posts. TikTok became a thing. So think about how you can kind of make that next step to different trends and kind of stay on your toes, to stay most involved and to reach the most people, so you can get your message out. So now kind of the rest of this is just kind of resources a little bit, but creating graphic and SciComm materials. This is just a screenshot of Canva. I'm sure lots of you have probably used Canva. All of my students knew about it before I even had to tell them about it. So a lot of people use Canva. It has a free option. It's a great resource just to kind of play around with graphic stuff. But for when you want to create graphics online, you want to make sure there's accessible to who you're showing them to. So you want to check things like color contrast. So that's the background versus like the text that you're sharing. You're not going to have like a black background and then like a dark blue text over that black background, because most people wouldn't be able to read it. But you want to also think about someone that maybe visually have different visual impairments, might not be able to even read that. And there's tools that can help you check those things. Utilize different types of fonts. So sans serif fonts over serif fonts. The font here is an example of a serif font, or of sans serif font, where it doesn't have, typically it's not having like the caps. So this would be more of an example of a sans serif font at the top. So not the most accessible. So probably not a great move on my part. But this is a serif font, sorry. And then this is a sans serif font that looks more clean, I guess. There's research studies that prove that it's easier to read. Add alt text when possible. You can now add alt text to your different graphics on Instagram, so that individuals that may have visual difficulties or can actually learn about what you're talking about. And then use bulleted list over lengthy paragraphs. So using bulleted lists and segmenting things out is much more effective way of communicating than just writing everything in one big paragraph. So I pulled some examples of my SciComm on Instagram. So I've done various different methods. This is very content focused. So this is tell you everything, give you all the background info that you need to know to get up to speed and give you some actionable items on it. And so this is an example. Swipe posts, they don't do as well anymore, but I still like them because they're a great resource where I can refer people to because I pack them tons with chock full of stuff. Other ways you can do it is like a graphic focused. I made this in like 10 minutes and then typed this out. Much less time, still communicating a topic that's really interesting to people. But the content and the info that I want people to know is really written out. So the graphic catches your attention. The written out portion kind of gives you all of the details. And then there's video focus, which is my least favorite because I'm not good at it. So I'm not an expert on Reels or TikTok, but video focus is really the new area of kind of where SciComm is moving and just social media in general. So I did want to give some examples if there was anybody online that is thinking about getting into teaching, examples of how you can integrate SciComm into your courses. These are things that I've done or I continue to do. I incorporate Twitter into classroom assignments. So students create a Twitter account. I create a course specific hashtag that they can all post under where we can all see what everyone's posting. And they practice communicating about concepts they learn about in class or things they hear that are related to class concepts. So it's kind of getting their feet wet into that kind of online community because Twitter has a really big scientific communication space of a lot of different professionals that are communicating online. And then also students get practice communicating to public and professional audiences. And a lot of my online classes, we do a lot of graphic design content. They tailor their message to their audience, whether they're communicating peer-to-peer, so you can be a little more jargon heavy with that, or you're communicating just to a public where I'm going to dock points if you're using a bunch of jargon. I'm going to look at color contrast. I'm going to look at different things like that and give you tips on how to improve. They also do just plain written format. How would you just write it out if you were writing it out like a blog post or just a summary? And they also practice oral formats as well, which I've had some people do TikToks, which is always entertaining on the grading side of things. And really an important aspect of embedding it into your courses is that students are not only gaining experience, but they're generating things that they can use in practice. So especially in like a dietetics and nutrition field, if you're incorporating these things are things they can add to their portfolio. Yeah, maybe I give them some feedback on things to tweak and modify, but upon doing that, they add these things to their portfolio and they're things that they can use in practice later on. Other benefits of SciComm on social media that I wanted to throw in. There's a reason that you want to kind of show up on social media. It is a great networking tool. I've met individuals, Dr. Dillon is on this call, that I have collaborated with and written papers with purely from the fact that I met them online doing SciComm. I've also published a book with another PhD researcher in the gut microbiome. So definitely showing up online can give you tons of different opportunities. It can lead to job opportunities. It's a marketable experience. It's a skill that's needed in many fields, and it's a skill that's applicable to pretty much any field. Everyone is running a social media. I mean, even our department has their own social media. So I am the department kind of coordinator for helping our students run social media. It can also lead to things like brand partnerships, which can open different doors that you didn't know were there. And then just gaining notoriety in the field. You start to make a name for yourself, essentially, which gives you even more opportunities. So just service level, not just communicating to the public, there's tons of other benefits just outside of just the public aspect of SciComm. So I really put these in here for your reference later, but some examples of really good SciComm accounts that I follow on social media. I included a variety of different ones on the next kind of 3 slides. These are ones that are in the nutrition and exercise science space that I think do a really good job, and they all do it a little bit differently. So I tried to give you a variety of different resources to kind of follow. This is some general SciComm. So if you're just looking for individuals that are doing, the Unbiased Science Pod, they do very general, like any sort of topic you can imagine in science SciComm. Whereas people like Science Bay communicate a lot about how you would get kids engaged in science. The Space Gal, Space, Science Sam does a lot in terms of like health and kind of immunology and things like that. She was very active with COVID and kind of explaining some of that. And then Raven the Science Maven does a ton in molecular biology, but she also does a lot of fun outreach type of things. And she's making like huge name for herself out in the field. So these are people for general SciComm just to follow for good examples. And then I also want to plug, there's health practitioners online too that are showing up in these spaces. So tons of different MDs and other sort of health practitioners that are showing up to kind of communicate to individuals. So these are all great examples to follow that all kind of do it a little bit differently. And here's another resource that I found to learn more. The University of Luxembourg has a pocket guide for SciComm that's very digestible and easy and kind of gives you tips on how you might get started, how to think of your audience and things like that. So I've linked that here and I'll share the slides so that everyone has them as well. So final thoughts on SciComm. You have the tools, you have the education, just go for it. I personally think you have a moral and ethical obligation to practice scientific communication, even if you're just starting by communicating with your family and friends. That's better than nothing. I personally think online is fun and that you can find a lot of different formats and kind of bring out that creative side. I love the graphic design process. It's very therapeutic for me. And so it's another aspect where you can kind of use your education and stuff. There's a huge audience online that's interested in what you have to say. And again, if we're not showing up as the professionals, someone else is showing up for us. And oftentimes they're providing misinformation. It's also a really low stakes way to practice your science communication, showing up online. I mean, everyone's going to get haters online. It's fine. If you don't have haters, you're doing something wrong. But it's really low stakes. You can also delete a post. You find an error, delete the post, repost it. It's fine. It will likely open doors for you that you didn't know were possible. Like I said, it's opened tons of doors for me. And then don't let analysis paralysis keep you from getting started. Even if one person learns something, that's a win. Doesn't matter if you get 500 likes or 2 likes. Someone's learning something, someone's engaging with it. That's a win in my book. And you're probably going to make mistakes. I made tons of them. I was never not using accessible fonts, not using appropriate color contrast, but you learn as you go. And now there's tons of training and tools out there to even help you learn more officially. And so just start. Making mistakes is a part of the process. And that is all I have. So I went a little bit over, so sorry about that.
Thank
All
you
right.
so much. Yep, looks like some questions are popping in from the chat. So I'll let you go ahead and start with that one.
Yeah, so this one says, I like how you're putting the PubMed reference at the bottom of your graphic. Researchers immediately see. Yep. And I've even done like little tidbits and stories and stuff. Sometimes in some of my Instagram captions, I'll put like, just copy and paste this number and it'll bring up the study, because truly, if they just copy and paste that number into Google search, the first link that hits is that PubMed link. And so not all research articles are going to have PubMed, but it's very accessible and it's just easier than this like massive, long, daunting caption. It's just this like really chunky little number. Yeah.
I have something I'd like to hear your input into and give you the space to say. Our legislators are also consumers on social media, and the Farm Bill is up this year, and that is a huge piece of legislation that affects nutrition. So I'd like to give you the space to talk about, do you have any different messaging for that sort of population, even though they are just people, just like we are, just like the public is, and likely the same tips would work.
Yeah, I honestly, I probably wouldn't tailor like my message online to them per se. I would still probably because they're normal people, I would still communicate as I would communicate to everyone else. And we're seeing a lot of this at our state level because they're looking to try to take away licensure for our dietitians in the state. And so today was actually policy day at our state. And so a lot of people went down to the state house to try to advocate for that. But a good way to advocate it is, I mean, our scanned page, our South Carolina Academy has been posting info on their social media trying to advocate for it. So I do think social media is a great tool because you can demonstrate that the community and the public are really engaged in what you're doing. So it's not even just that you're communicating to these people, the legislators, that your info is important, but it's also you're communicating and showing that there's an interest in this and there's an interest in my profession or what I have to say, kind of thing.
Yeah, before we get to Talia's question for you, our legislative day is not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after. And it's the same organization. We're fighting the same battle against licensure restrictions. So it's the same PAC that's doing it. And absolutely, our legislators are, yes, they are significantly older than the population. That is true. But they have staffers that are tech savvy. And while letter writing is not as effective as it used to be, like the actual letter, and emails get gatekept, social media doesn't, not nearly as much. So this is a way. So that's my little advocacy, because mine is, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. Like you're talking about, if you're not given the message, then it's getting misconstrued. So
absolutely. The next one is, do you think that the SciComm space is too dilute already or is there room for new voices? There is tons of room for new voices. The algorithm is weird. So you can have no followers and post a viral TikTok or a viral Instagram reel, and all of a sudden you have all these people and eyes on you. So it is never too dilute. There's always a need for voices. Like I said, you have your own network of individuals that likely already follow you. Even just communicating to them as a professional and saying like, hey, I know what I'm talking about, that is creating a space in your own community. And even as you communicate there, things will start to expand. So I definitely never think something's too saturated for someone to get into. How do you emphasize in one subject? I'm looking. I really got into one subject just through my research and dietetics training. I never purposefully chose a topic and then niche down into it. It kind of chose me. I guess, it kind of did choose me. So I had expertise in my master's through just doing kind of gut microbiome research, PhD as well, developed IBS, and I also had personal kind of stakes in the game. And so I don't really have any tips to kind of niche down. They said looking more information on hormones. I mean, I recommend, I don't know, there's a benefit to niching down, and then there's also not. There's a benefit to having a really, if I only shared about only gut stuff, I'm only going to reach a certain audience all the time. But if I also then share about some nutrition stuff, I also reach another audience. So if you kind of bridge between the two, you can kind of marry different things. I don't really have a great answer for that because, again, I learned through trial and error. Can you speak to your level of time commitment in SciComm? I committed a lot of time to it during my PhD and my postdoc. I feel like, I mean, not a ton of time, but it was a therapeutic outlet for me where I could do graphic content creation when I was just sitting on the couch at night. And I really enjoyed that. It was a way to shift my mind from, I'm so tired of thinking about research and data and all this kind of stuff to well, I want to focus on pretty things in graphic design and how I'm going to communicate this to somebody. Now, as a professor teaching, I already kind of do some of that. And so I'm already exhausted. So I kind of had a blurb about burnout on the most recent professor slide in terms of social media. So I am at the point of kind of burning out a little bit and trying to take a step back so I can regain some steam. I also would say TikTok and the reel switch has probably pushed that too, because I analysis paralysis. I can't figure out how I want to do that. How far out do I plan content? There are lots of people that plan content months out, a month in advance. I usually had the best, it worked best for me to create something when it was on my brain and then to put it out pretty immediately. So I did a lot of a lot of the posts that I did were I saw something, I heard something, I want to talk about that, create the content, put it out, don't think twice about it. I felt like it was a more authentic way to share stuff because I'm responding in real time as things are happening. Whereas some people plan things months out, which is fine. It's an easy way to kind of chunk up your time. But it's also, I don't feel like it comes off as always as authentic.
Right. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. We're at 5. I don't want to
Yeah.
cut things off too much, but I also want to make sure we're respectful of everyone's time. And whatever way you like, let's thank Dr. Hoffman for her time today. So however you would like to. I have an
That was
earbud.
great,
I
Jessie.
clap and then I realize you can't hear it with my earbuds in. So, you know.
Well, thank you so much. This was great. And anyone on that last slide, you can contact me. I'll send someone my slides so that they can be shared around. They should have clickable links and things like that, so that you have that as a resource as well.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, and
Thank
enjoy
you.
your trip to Japan.
Thanks. Hopefully we get there.
You will.
Thank you.
Bye.